My name is Vijayanathan. I'm the Executive Director at the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention. And so the Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention was started by Kush, which was Kush and Desh Pradesh, which were sort of social activists and social groups that were in existence back in the, I want to say the 80s and 90s. And ASAP was formed because the community actually saw a heterosexual couple actually pass away as a result of their illness because they couldn't access information, education, and treatment support in their language. And so that death didn't have to happen. So the community got together and sorry, as to take a couple of steps back, Kush and Desh Pradesh were a group of queer activists within the community, queer South Asian activists. And so they started an organization called ASAP, and it was run out of garage for a long time, and then it moved to ACT and rented some space there, and then we started incorporating and became a formal organization about 28 years ago now. And so what we primarily do is we support folks living with and affected by HIV within the South Asian community. We speak about 10 different languages in this office, and we'll be starting to provide services in Arabic and Farsi now that we got funding from the Public Health Agency of Canada to do that, simply because we find that there aren't a lot of services or an organization for the Middle Eastern community. So, and because our religious backgrounds are similar and sort of our cultures are similar, and we already have some clients who are Arabic and Farsi speaking, we'll be supporting that community as well. And we're also a space where we work with gay, bi, queer, trans men specifically, and men who have sex with men around, and provide social support for them, one-on-one support, HIV education prevention. We also have a women's education program where we educate women in general about sexual health needs for themselves and how to access that support when they need it.
And so is the South Asian community adversely affected by HIV/AIDS?
We're not adversely. So in Canada, no. Not that the numbers are showing. We have about 100 folks on our caseload that we work with regularly. Over the last year, within the first month of 2017, we saw 4 new cases coming through the door. So we're not really sure where the numbers are at this point in Canada. However, when you look at India, we have about 2.5 million people living with HIV in India. So yes, in India, not so much here in Canada. However, we also know that a lot of people are not getting tested for HIV, and because of the stigma and discrimination around sexual health in general, and then HIV on top of that to further stigmatize it, a lot of people are hesitant or don't know how to go get tested, or they just assume that it would automatically get tested anyway when you do your blood work. So people aren't informed of the nuances, and that's one thing we find out when we do the education session is we see that this is a new learning for people, that they have to ask for it and they get tested that way. I mean, women do get tested if they're pregnant, but if they're not pregnant, then they won't have that conversation.
Is there still a lot of stigma about being LGBTQ in the South Asian community?
There is. There's a lot of homophobia that still exists within the South Asian community. And we still see a lot of young folks who are struggling with coming out and trying to find the balance of whether they should come out or not, and fearful of what their parents and families might say. There are several individuals like myself who are accepted by my family, by my extended family, and community as a whole. That's why I'm allowed to be an out gay executive director of an AIDS service organization, because if I wasn't, then I wouldn't be here, type of situation. And a lot of our staff members are out as well at some level. But there's a lot of fear still within the South Asian community of, if I come out of the closet, what's going to happen? My parents are going to disown me. A lot of the international students that are coming in here are leaving India so that they can come and be themselves here and then get an education while they're here and start living their lives fully. And then they say, well, I don't need to tell my family. What they don't know won't hurt them, type of situation, so they can live their lives separately and sort of have dual lives that they're living.
So in the South Asian community, and especially in India, where does homophobia sprout from? Is it a religious thing? Is it a tradition thing?
So there's a lot of theories, and everything gets blamed on religion, and this is my opinion. But homophobia really started after colonization. Because even when you look at the third gender or the trans community, the Hijra community were revered in India, and they held a special place in society where they were invited to weddings and housewarmings and new births and anything auspicious they were invited to bless the household, and they were given gifts as a result. And now when you look after colonization and sort of the British law coming in, and possibly even Christianity, Catholicism coming into the country as well, the traditional ways of life were taken away, and new rules were imposed, and the Hijra community became sort of the slums of India, and now they're seen as individuals. If you don't give them money, then they will curse you. So they've been sort of I guess what's the word? They've been taken out of their ranks, right, of their place in society. And now India has sort of caught up again and said, we'll acknowledge, in Pakistan as well, they'll acknowledge the third gender and trans folks have rights within India. And then the Indian government repealed Section 377, which was the one which was the law that sort of made homosexuality illegal, and then now they've put it back into the law books after the new government, and so now there's still fights happening in India to repeal it again. And when you look at ancient history, and when you look at the religious stories, and when you listen to some of the if you go back and look at the history of India, there's a lot of homosexuality, there's a lot of homosexual relationships. The Kama Sutras prescribe how to engage in same-sex love, or the pleasure principles, and I think it was under Manusmritis that kind of sort of put women in second-class citizenship positions, as well as condemned homophobia or homosexuality. So it's one of those things where you don't know, really, 100%. There's a lot of theory, but if you look at our religion and hear our stories and our history, homosexuality was a part of society, was a part of life. Trans folks were a part of life and were a part of society. And it was really after the colonization process did we become very illegal in our countries.
Specifically in terms of being a queer person of color, like what are some of the unique challenges you face that a queer person who is not a person of color, like a white person, would not have to face?
That's an interesting question. So again, racism, I mean, you have to talk about racism, right? And sort of what is valued and what is not valued, and sort of the lighter skinned, chiseled look is what's out there, right? And if you're blonde and blue eyed, then that's even better. And even it's in the sort of the mind frame of folks of color as well, right? So a lot of South Asians and East Asians and whoever really sort of lust after that because that is the norm and that's what's accepted. And when you look at shadism within our communities as well, it's often the lighter skinned, the fairer people that are sort of thought of as symbols of beauty and not the darker skinned folks. And again, looking at the body types of individuals as well, it's that six-pack and firm chest and like big arms and things like that people are drawn to. And again, that's a broad statement, and individuals have their own perceptions of their definition of beauty. But generally, that's the theme. So when a person of color, and I find this with stories from South Asian and East Asian folks, is that they're not so desirable if they don't fit into that. So if they go into a bar space, then they're sort of othered a little bit, unless they're part of the circle or part of the clique. Then they are othered, and they're not seen as attractive individuals, or they find it hard getting boyfriends or having a relationship with individuals, or they have difficulty conversing while they're there. I mean, bars are hard to converse in anyway, but still. And even if you go into the bathhouse situation, again, it's the folks of color, especially East and Southeast Asian and South Asian folks, are sort of on the bottom of the list. So racism definitely around that, and people guise it as preference and whatever, and that's fine. Everyone has their cup of tea, but it's the way you communicate that preference is the issue, and oftentimes it's not very pleasant is what we receive. So it's like, no Indians or no Asians, or no curry or no rice, I think is the other sort of, we're not curry and we're not rice, and that's the issue. So, and then also the language barrier tends to be some of those issues, concerns as well in terms of negotiating and power dynamics. So if they are in a mixed race relationship, then who holds the power within that relationship, and how is that power played out within that relationship as well, right? And oftentimes it's the person of color, especially if the person is new to the country and cannot speak in English. How much power does the other person have? When you look at that too. So we hear some of the situations where that happens, and some stories come through. And then even with me, like, unless you know the language and you're able to navigate systems, then you're always going to face a problem, right? So growing up in Winnipeg myself, and having to sort of stay in the closet until I graduated university and gave my mom my diploma and said, you know what, I gave you my diploma from the university, and I'm the first sort of kid in the entire family to graduate from university given our situation. Now I need my freedom, so you can either take me for being gay or leave me. Sort of, that's paraphrasing. I was nicer to her about it, but that's what she got, and she chose to accept me. But then she also said, don't tell anyone, because then no one's going to marry your sisters. And so you carry that kind of stuff through. So all those kinds of pressures also come on to the individual, and then that plays out in the way you interact in society, right? Because then all this internalized homophobia and this fear is still within you, even though you're out at some level. And how do you navigate those systems, knowing all of that fear that still exists within you? And so it's only until I came out to the entire family was I able to stand on my own 2 feet and challenge situations and issues as they arise, right? And a lot of people still struggle with that. So those are some of the unique aspects of, I think, being a person of color, and coming from an extended family situation. So it's not nuclear. And I think when you look at sort of, to use the language, the white family, it's very mother, father, brother, sisters, whatever, and that's within them, and whatever decisions you make within, it stays within. But I think with the South Asian, I'll speak for the South Asian community for sure, in that whatever decision is made by the individual within that nuclear family also affects and impacts everyone else. So it's sort of a wide cast. So I can't be out in my nuclear family and still be out in the community, because just in case somebody finds out or somebody sees me going into a particular space, what will that impact be on the entire family, not just my mom and dad and sisters?
So the idea that people won't marry your sisters, is that because, I guess, you being out tarnishes the family name? Is that the logic behind that?
Well, I mean, again, given homophobia and the lack of information and opportunities for education for parents to be educated about homosexuality and being gay or lesbian or trans or bisexual, people still hold on to those old myths as it's a mental health issue, that he's crazy, that he's tarnished the family, and if it runs in the genes, are the sisters going to get those types of fears that come out. And so the white community faced that a long time ago as well, and so we're kind of still facing that and dealing, I think. And you still see that within the white communities as well. When I work up in York Region, there's still a lot of fear when young kids are coming out and people are still being kicked out of their homes. And that's still very much true and very much present in our communities as well. And again, there's still some changes because there's a bit more education, there's a bit more conversation happening, and ASAP does some of that work. But it is that whole mental health, and is it genetic, and is it going to be passed down to their kids? When will the bloodline end type of situation, right? It's all those things. And what are people going to say? Like I said, it's an extended family, and that includes neighbors and stuff as well. So and it's that isolation that the parents would face, right? So my mom, when I came out in Winnipeg, of all places, and my mom still lives there, she's like, well, what will others think and what will others say? and it's fine who you are and I'll still love you, but I'm really fearful of what other people are going to say. And that still very much holds true here. And they feel isolated as well, so they have no place to connect and no others to connect with, to know that they're not the only South Asian parents who have a gay or lesbian or trans child.
And so, in terms of internalized homophobia, which is a topic that has always fascinated me, do you see a lot of that in the work that you do with ASAP, with some of the people that you work with? Do you see a lot of it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of, everyone brings their baggage in here, and the one-on-one sessions and the questions that we get at forums and workshops. Absolutely. There's a lot of hate, self-hate at first, because everyone is making this individual feel like they should hate themselves for who they are. And there's not a lot of answers out there. When you look at media, when you look at stories, when you look at books, there isn't a lot of content around Hinduism and homosexuality or South Asians and homosexuals, right? You really, really have to look. But when you open up a library or go into an LGBTQ section at the library, a lot of the books are for the mainstream community, it's not representative, right? And so when we do our work, we ensure that we try to have South Asians out and in the forefront of the work that we do. And it's only recently that we started seeing South Asians and people of color in media who are LGBT identified. So that's helping a little bit, but it's still quite rampant. And again, like I said, the whole fear around others finding out, even though their parents might not be here, but their aunts or their family friends or whoever is here, or a straight peer of theirs from the same university back home has come to Canada, and they know. So it's a whole string of chain reaction events that would happen, and they still live in fraud. So when we hold groups, a lot of people don't come because they're like, I don't know who's going to be there, and if someone is there that I know, and then we kind of sort of say, well, if they're there for a reason too. So it might be a way, but then it's still that trust and that issue, right? And a lot of internal fear of what that would look like.
And how do we begin to combat the internalized homophobia?
I think it's something that we're doing, and I think a lot of ethno-specific organizations are doing, is that trying to get stories of people out there and getting faces of South Asians out there, creating education campaigns for the South Asian specific communities especially, and parents just saying, you know what, it's okay, it's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing. And again, using it in a language-specific way and a culturally appropriate way too, right? Sometimes what we do is, even within the South Asian community, we tend to look at it from a very political perspective rather than from a very basic perspective, because we assume the worst of people rather than assuming they legitimately and genuinely do not know and do not understand. This is what they've been taught. This is what was normal in society. They recognize men have sex with men. They recognize women who have sex with women, but they don't actively talk about it. It's a very quiet and very passive community, right? So this is how we put the information out there. This is how we talk to people, get them to understand. And after education, if they're still ignorant, then they're ignorant. There's not much you can do about it. But I think 90% of the people will actually at least start thinking about things differently, right? It took my mom about 11 years to finally come to terms with the fact that I was gay, that I am gay, and we would still get marriage proposals at the house for me from Toronto, and so she finally, about 3 or 4 years ago, and I've been out since I was 20, she finally told the individuals in the community that he's gay, don't worry about the marriage, type of situation, which is a nice revelation for her, but it took her 11 years. They're not going to get it right away. And so now we're seeing more and more South Asian parents coming out to sort of say, my children are gay, which is nice too. So I think you have to educate and start a movement within the community, and then it'll branch out. You can't do a top-down approach or a forceful approach, because then you will shut people out and shut people down very quickly.
That makes a lot of sense. And so, just shifting gear a little bit, I know that this is mostly kind of a conversation with the Latin community rather than the South Asian community, but in terms of the fact that it was people of color who were adversely affected by the shooting at Pulse, do you think that that fact was left out too much of the media narrative and that conversation didn't occur enough?
Mm-hmm. I think, I don't think it did happen I think it happened poorly, and it happened too late in the conversation. I think it was still very much about the killing and the terrorist attack and the Muslim who did all the killing, when it really wasn't because he was Muslim. It was just because he had a mental health issue, and he happened to be a Muslim and subscribed to some of those concerns. So, but people didn't start talking about the people who were killed until later, and then until the story was sort of dying down a little bit, right? And that's when all that information came up. It would have been interesting to see, what the thoughts and concerns are for the individuals there, but I'm just trying to think. Yeah, it's not top of mind anymore, and it's oftentimes when there are people of color or Indigenous folks who are at the end of hate crimes, it just kind of goes on the sidelines, right? And that's unfortunate. So when you look at the Indigenous women, and when you look at Black Lives Matter movements and all that kind of stuff, it is folks of color who are ignored, and cases for them to be solved or take longer than if it was a person who happened to be white who was killed or whatever, right? And the classic example I bring up is Jane Kriba. And that was terrible that happened to her. However, her case was resolved, and family was able to rest and, put her to rest in peace and be peaceful and come to terms much quicker than the black kid that got shot, right? Or the gay individuals who even got here. Like, there was a couple of Muslim men who were kidnapped and they went missing, and it took them years to find out. I don't think they still have found them. Right, so when you look at these stories and how things roll out, you can't help but to wonder if it's not a coincidence, right? So yeah, and Pulse was one of those situations too. It's like, well, a person of color killed people of color, and it's not a big thing. It's the gay community within the current Trump presidency. That also has to play into it as well. So. It's an interesting time that we're living in, and it's always been an interesting time, but a lot of things are coming to surface now, and people are thinking a bit more critically, which is great to see, and holding people accountable.
But do you think that mainstream queer ideologies and discourse and LGBTQ movements and all of the advancement of our community, do you think that it has gotten better at including people of color, or do you think that you're still left out as much as ever?
I think there's a perceived sense that we're more inclusive, but it's becoming more apparent that we're excluding people. So and a clear example is when we work on large campaigns, it's for the MSM community, oftentimes the campaign and everything is actually already handed to us, and then they're asking us to make it ethno or culturally specific. Well, I can't do much with, highly sexualized content. I'm not going to take it to Scarborough. I can't put that in a community health center in Scarborough and put our logo on it. Yeah, it's challenging, but if you can't challenge people if they haven't been brought to a certain level, right, of education or a level of comfort. And there's different ways of talking to different people and challenging people in a very respectful way that encourages conversation rather than isolates, right? So, and when we look at who we put in the media as a person of color and how we portray them, again, it's nice that the color is being represented, but oftentimes it's the hyper effeminate gay men or the really butch lesbian or, the trans person who really isn't a trans person of color, all those kinds of things come up. Meanwhile, there are a lot of trans people of color who are in acting and modeling, etc. So I think it's nice that we talk about it and we consider it, but I don't think I'm not going to say we. I don't think it's actually an inclusive process in terms of ensuring, and the resources are not put behind supporting that either.